win this. The competition that's coming up in 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So anyway, I'd like to introduce to you our guest speaker for today, Anthony George, CEO of Fuel Tracks, and thank you so much, Anthony, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
He's going to talk about his story later on after we go through the first half of this lecture, which is on scaling metrics and pivot. So till now, we've talked about starting a business, building all the required elements of the business, doing the financial models. Then we come to the point is, but you started a business, now what? You've got to grow it. You've got to grow it, you've got to scale it. That's where we find all of that. But before we get into that, remember I said in the very first lecture, I introduced to you the whole concept of my Ashokisms, the stuff that were life's lessons really that were sometimes paradoxical. And every time we've gone through some of them. So here's a couple more that's sort of relevant to this topic. And this is simply a way of saying, pay attention to the details. The power of compounding small improvements is more important than some giant leap to achieve a breakthrough. That rarely happens when you're building a business. So pay attention to the details. Now you will have some breakthroughs, but improvement is not additive, it is multiplicative. So if you improve 1, 1, 1, 1, it's not just 3. It could be a lot more than 3%. So that's one. And the second Ashokism is during doldrums, precipitate a crisis and manage it. What does that mean? You know, provocative leadership is not about just sitting back and letting things happen. It is when your business starts to stagnate, and all businesses hit doldrums, you've got to do something that disrupts the organization, that disrupts your strategy. So this is not about chaos for its own sake. It's about precipitating a crisis. But if you do precipitate a crisis, have the competence and the calmness to manage it. Have the tools in your pocket to handle what comes from precipitating a crisis. What's a simple example of precipitating a crisis? You go to a trade show, you meet a potential customer, he wants some big change in your product. You come back and you tell your engineering team, we're going to deliver this change by next July. Now that's a crisis. But it might galvanize your team into getting off their butts and doing something. So these are the two sort of life lessons that are useful, at least for this one. I hope you've been keeping track of all of them through the 7. So today we're going to have it in 2 parts. We're going to talk about scaling metrics and pivoting. I have Anthony give his story. And then we're going to talk about pitching and storytelling. Pitching and storytelling are hand in glove. So let's start with scaling. Scaling is not just growing. It's growing revenue faster than you grow your costs and faster than you grow chaos, without chaos. A lot of times growth can mask a lot of ills, but underlying that growth can be some really chaotic conditions that'll come back to haunt you later on. So that's what scaling is. Metrics, they're your compass. They are the key numbers, the key parameters that you focus on to tell you whether your business is healthy, whether it's growing, whether corrective action needs to be taken, and whether you need to pivot. And pivoting is what I call a courageous course correction. Just because you came up with this idea of natural gas for Nigerian companies and you go to Nigeria and it's not working, you might have to say, okay, I'm going to go switch to solar or something. I'm just talking about what a pivot could be. It's a courageous correction of your course. So here's what you do. You grow with clarity, you measure with great discipline, your metrics, and you pivot with courage. Everybody gets that? So those are the 3 elements of from gestation to success of any new idea. And you're all deep tech people, so your ideas will take longer to gestate than, let's say, theirs, which is a SaaS model. That, if it's going to be successful, will be quicker to market, I would assume. And we'll find out when we see your business plan, right? Because you're the SaaS model, software as a service.
Yes.
So today what we do, we want you to have some, just like last time, we gave you the template for constructing a financial model that helps you plan your business. Today, hopefully you will learn what's the feedback loop you need to understand to allow you to scale, to measure all of the major factors of your scaling, and also if you need to pivot. Think proactively about whether you need to pivot and define the metrics that matter. And so learn how to scale with structure, measure what matters, as we talked about. And your pivot shouldn't be for the sake of pivoting. It should be only if you need to survive and to flourish and to prosper. Everything making sense to you folks? Any questions? So what's scaling? And what is it not? Well, scaling is not just growth. As I said, with growth can come chaos. So it's structured, sustainable expansion that you know that I can go to a new market, or I can go to a new geography, or I can go to a new product with control, without chaos. The unit economics that you calculate, like your 1.7 million that you did for one plant, will it hold when you've got 10 plants? Or will there be chaos? So you got to figure out, or will you actually be able to reduce it because of volume? Like we talked about with the robot last week, where we had a projection of the COGS at low quantities, and we had a projection of the COGS at high quantity. Remember that? And it was like a 50% drop because they'd gone out and gotten quotes from their suppliers. If this motor costs $100 at quantity 10, what will it cost at quantity 100? So those are the sorts of unit economics that you have to make sure will hold, or we may even improve at like, and it just doesn't have to be COGS. It could be customer acquisition costs. It could be travel. It could be all sorts of other unit economics. And it's all about moving beyond just that initial minimum viable product and pilot to sustainable production and growth. And that's includes, can you hire enough people? Like you're doing 16, but if you've got 10, is that 160? Can you support it in the back office? Can you make payroll? Can you do the billing? Can you collect? Or will your receivables, your day sales outstanding go out of control and then you run out of cash? Can you manufacture if you're in the manufacturing business, like the robot? Can you manufacture 100 a month versus 10 a month? And can you deliver and support at large scale? So all of this is what scaling is. So when people talk about scaling, it isn't just about growing. Just remember that. There are lots of pitfalls, right? When you scale, and these are hidden. You scale too quickly. You think you've got something great, and all of a sudden and we'll talk about some business use cases that really did a bad job of this and did a good job of this. You could add bureaucracy, too many layers of management, and kill that entrepreneurial culture that exists in your company because you've been scaling too quickly. Your culture might change. You might end up bringing in people that destroy your culture. And I'll give you a personal example. This is a company that I took public, the one that we talked about, the first company to go public on NASDAQ by an Indian American. So we were building the business, and this was in the telecom business. And we needed a top-notch sales manager. We had lots of sales guys, and I was kind of handling them, but my bandwidth was getting stretched. So we needed a really top-notch sales manager. So we recruited a headhunter to go find us the sales manager. And they brought a lot of candidates, and instinctively I knew I didn't want a big company person who had all these bureaucratic impulses. But the best candidate ended up being someone who came out of one of do you remember the Bell companies? The 7 baby bells? Yeah, this is a young group. And other members. Mike remembers it. Well, AT&T was the monopoly for all telecom services. Those were the days when you called from Houston to Dallas, would cost you 50 cents for every minute that you were on the phone. When I first came to this country, calling back home to India was $4 a minute. This is $1970. It would be $20 a minute to call home and just say hi to your parents. So anyway, back to one of these giant companies. AT&T was $200 billion company, a monopoly. And he was a senior executive there, so he passed all of the credentials. He came on board on a Monday. And by Wednesday, I knew I had made a mistake. His name was Frank something. It's important why it happened. On Friday, I walked in his office and let him go. That's how long, you hire slow, fire fast. We talked about that 2 or 3 lectures ago. On Monday morning, I walk into my office and on my table is a little award from all the salespeople. It's a hot dog, a Frankfurter on a stand, and it was called the Frankie Award because his name was Frank. Well, the Frankie Award for courageous decision making. So that became a thing in the company for the next 5 years. Is that month, whoever made the most courageous decision got this traveling Frankie Award. So it's just an anecdote. Sorry it took so long to tell you, but about how culture is so important when you're scaling and growing. Because the first thing this guy wanted to do is, where's my secretary? Where's the bathroom? Where's my, oh, this chair is not comfortable enough. We're a startup. Maybe sit on a wooden crate. Some more hidden traps. There's lags, your systems, that can kill you. Your back office systems cannot keep up with your growth. You burn too quickly, you hire too many people, you go to too many conferences, you have team getaways without having the cash to support it. You also have leadership bottlenecks. You can have talent mismatch like Mr. Frank. It's a complete talent mismatch. And you might be over-reliant on specific distribution channels. And finally, you ignore the unit economics as we talked about. You have lack of operational discipline, so you're all over the map. You don't have, for instance, in our case, collections was critical because each bill was like $30 a month. And if you didn't collect your $30 a month from 100,000 customers, it was a problem. All right, so lots of pitfalls to scaling. But how to avoid them? Well, validate before you accelerate. So make sure your product fits the market and you're not just an idea. Once again, idea looking for a problem to solve. Build for growth. So put back office systems, processes, and procedures in place that'll handle the growth, not always trying to catch up. So put in an ERP system that can handle 10x or 20x of what you are doing currently. Again, we talked about culture. Remember one of the Ashokisms? Higher trust. The cost of betrayal is expensive. So stay with that cultural, stay close to your customers. We'll get to metrics. So healthy scaling is growth, efficient growth, while keeping the culture and keeping your courage. So let's look at 2 cases of scaling. One is WeWorks and the other is Airbnb. You all know these 2 companies, right? One is gone, and then one is a success story. Which one's gone? Thank you. Clearest contrast in scaling philosophy. They both grew fast. They both raised huge amounts of money before even they went public. And they both are similar. They operate in kind of a real estate market. But one, Airbnb scaled with discipline, avoiding all those pitfalls. And one made every mistake possible. And we had without discipline, let's look at WeWork. They wanted to be, they're really a real estate subleasing business. But what they did was they went out and they leased long-term real estate for short-term rentals. And they grew crazily. They scaled by speed. They went all over the globe before they validated the concept. And they also added all kinds of crazy little sub lines of theirs, like they had We Live, which was housing. They had We Gym, which was workout locations, all of this. And they raised $12 billion from SoftBank. Guess what happened? The IPO collapsed after the investors saw the real numbers. They just were based on charisma. They said, we are WeWork, we can do it, we can pull this off. And for a while, remember that graph of the peak of expectations, unreasonable expectations, followed by the trough of disillusionment. Remember the chart from 2-3 lectures ago? They were a classic example of that, except that they didn't come back out of the trough of disillusionment. They just kept going down. So their valuation fell from 50 billion to 10 billion as they were getting ready to go public. And then, of course, we know the story, they crashed. And let's look at Airbnb. They scaled with great discipline. They started lean. They started by renting mattresses, if you recall, the founders, because they couldn't find hotel rooms in San Francisco for a conference. They built the platform, standard operating procedures for their network, for vetting hosts, for ensuring quality and managing payments, both to the hosts and to themselves. And they use data to drive their scaling, testing city by city before going out locally. Most of you are familiar with it. Most of us have used Airbnb. And the outcome, they're over $100 billion company today. Way over. What's their current market cap? They went public at 86. They scaled through process, purpose, and prudence. Kind of interesting comparing the two. Similar markets. I mean, vaguely similar markets. They once scaled recklessly. Remember the one other Ashokism? Truth lies between reckless optimism and paralyzing pessimism. And Airbnb took that truthful way, whereas WeWork took the reckless optimism way. This is all self-explanatory. WeWork proved that you can't scale first. Now let's get to metrics, because part of scaling, as we talked about, you've got to have measurable data that allows you to make these decisions. There are your startup truth serum, as I call it. You have 3 kinds of metrics. There's vanity metrics. Oh, how many likes did I get? How many clicks did I get? They don't really mean much unless you're in that business of accumulating likes. Actionable metrics are those that drive decisions. And then you have North Star metrics. I say these are the things that you paste on your board as to what you eventually intend to achieve. And here's some examples. For instance, for Airbnb, it's nights booked globally. For Slack, it's daily active teams. For Tesla, it's miles driven on autopilot. For Spotify, it's how much time people are listening globally to their streaming services. And for Uber, it's how many rides are completed. I mean, these are kind of the single North Star metric. But to get here, you need to have actionable measures. Is everybody keeping track of this, or am I going right above your heads? You good, Amir? If it doesn't drive them, if a metric doesn't drive a decision, it's noise. So if you've got clicks and likes and it doesn't cause you to make a decision, it's noise. Don't bother measuring it. Metrics that matter, there are 5 kinds. And we'll get into each of them carefully. Because in your case, you're mostly deep tech, and one is SaaS. Startups, you just don't sell your products. You have to sell, prove credibility, trust, reliability, long-term sustainability. Will your generator still be working 2 years after you put it? All of that needs to be, and they have to, they therefore require greater capital, 1.7 million for you, and deeper validation. If we look at the robot that we talked about yesterday, the window cleaning robot, why have we been 5 years in the making before we can launch it? Because we have to prove that it won't fall off the building. Remember, one of you asked, will it fall off the building? We did. Yes. So technology maturity, that's very important. That's classic, that window cleaning robot. Is the technology mature enough to be deployed commercially in quantity? So NASA has this TRL, right? Technology readiness level. You've all heard of that metric. Number 1 is when you're just starting. Number 9 is when you're fully commercial and it's operating with great reliability. So you've got to measure. It's good for you all to measure your TRL while you're building your company. I mean, for my guy in the window cleaning robot, I still tell him he's at a 6 or 7 problem. He's not at a 9. And you really don't want to be selling in volume and scaling till you're at a 9. All of this, your IP strength, how defensible is your IP, your trade secrets. We'll get on to all of that next week. And how much cash do you have to be able to scale? Because as we talk, you're going to lose money for the first 2 years. You're going to lose money for the first 2 years? First
Well, in the middle, 1.5.
2 years. So how much cash do you have before you can start buying all that inventory? Remember, you buy inventory to scale. Your old deep tech startups, you need to put out cash. You know, I need to buy the tapes for the superconductors. That's going to cost you money, right? 20,000 kilometers per location.
Yeah, you make the tape.
You are making it from wherever you make it. Okay. Validation and market fit metrics, that's fairly key. You've of course got to validate. And this typically, you know, the first step, technology maturity, is when you do seed round. This one is either a seed or a Series A. And you have got to hit all of these. And I won't go into too much detail because I think we want to hear Anthony. These are all available to you. Regulatory milestones, time to validation. Is the market ready for your product? For instance, you know, there's 1 trillion square feet of skyscraper glass. The market is ready for that robot. We just got to make sure that it is at TRL 9 before we put it out in the market. Yeah, each milestone you got to track. Financial sustainability metrics. We went through that a lot yesterday. I mean, last week, building a financial model. Good job. And you've got to keep your eyes on how do you grow your margins, how do you control your costs, how do you control your cash before you start growing. So those metrics are very important. These are all about the metrics you need to use. So you know, when you download these sheets and when you're 2 years from now, you're starting to grow your company, go back and refer to these. Yeah, so like I like to say, deep tech winners master both the art of science and the science of solvency. No, not going bankrupt, not running out of cash. And science with the art of science, I like to call it. Metrics by stage, you've got early commercialization. My slides have got some kind of problems in their animation. Scaling and market expansion, you've got to have your key manufacturing KPIs. Who are your strategic partners? Do you have distributors? Do you have sales offices? You have 12 people in Nigeria. And how do you enter these markets as you scale and expand? Do you do it with your own staff? Do you do it with partners? Do you do it with strategic partners, distributors, agents, etc.? And how do you use your advisory board? At this point, you're already at a Series B. You all know what money fundraising, C, Series A, B, C is. We're going to talk about that in 2 weeks. Fundraising. Okay, and then finally, impact and maturity. You have to be profitable. This is when you get a Series C and you eventually exit. You get acquired by someone, or you can go public, or you merge with some big strategic partner. And again, a lot of this is, evident, self-evident, self-explanatory, but 99 out of the 100 people I talk to get this wrong. All of this. Something falls through the cracks. Somebody doesn't pay attention to one of these details. So far, it all makes sense to you? You got every point I made? Well, these are available for you to download and just go back and look at it. So what your goal is, when you first put your product out, you've got a product that's solving a pain point. You're a disruptor. Like the robot that's going to clean windows is a disruptor. Till now, it's all been cleaned by human beings hanging from ropes with buckets and squeegees. But what your goal is to become the gold standard. Not everybody gets there, but Airbnb got there. SpaceX actually ends up getting there, even though I detest the man. Sorry. And then finally pivoting. And we're going to see what pivoting is all about. What is a pivot? Well, you want to change your strategy, pursue another opportunity. I think it's self-evident the types of pivots. Your product is slightly incorrect. Your customer segment is incorrect. You went after the wrong customer. Maybe you should not be going after these small businesses. Maybe you should be going after the power generation companies. I don't know. I mean, I'm just giving an example of customer segment pivot. Panel was wrong. And your revenue model is wrong. Instead of charging $30,000 per window cleaning robot, we should probably charge $50 per square yard clean, something like that. That's also, remember we talked about, somebody asked me that last time? Why are we charging it this way? So this is evident. Product market fit signals, customers are asking you for the product rather than you have to push them. That means it's fitting nicely. You have high retention rate, they're reordering, their willingness to pay, maybe sometimes even give you upfront. Because you can go to customers and say, I'm a startup, let me have 50% of the order up front. And you'll get it sometimes. Not all the times, but sometimes. And get feedback. And when to pivot? Let's go straight to the pivoting framework. Define your riskiest assumption. Test with a new MVP. If invalidated, choose your pivot type and communicate your pivot clearly to everyone. So the pivoting framework is this: when to pivot, the types of pivot, no traction, better opportunity, market shifts, or competitors are outpacing. And I think some of this we'll get from Anthony in just a couple of minutes. And evolve before you break. Don't just keep beating your head against the wall if it's not working. If your carbon capture is for steel.
Iron and steel.
Iron and steel. And if it isn't working for iron and steel, pivot and go somewhere else. Right? That's my point. Maybe go to, what's Samantha's?
Yes, carbon capture and cement.
Cement. Yeah, iron and steel and cement. You go to iron and steel. They go to cement. Famous pivots. Instagram. They started as a check-in app. Today, the #1 photo and storytelling sharing app. Slack, they were a game. They were a video game. They became the #1 internal chat tool for companies. YouTube started as a dating site. Can we live without YouTube today? We all had to pivot because where they were, YouTube was getting killed by the other ones, Tinder, whatever, who else is the dating thing? And pivoted to become the general video sharing site for the whole world. So talking about multi-billion dollar companies that are existing today because they pivoted. And here's the founder's paradox. They all live in contradictions because this is what you deal with. One is you have to be confident yet humble while you do all this, while you scale, while you measure, and while you intend to pivot. Don't shave Superman. Do you remember that explanation? Visionary yet data-driven, do both. The art of science, the science of solvency, and patient yet fast. You can sometimes go faster by slowing down. Wrap up, we have a couple of good examples. Kodak didn't pivot, got destroyed. They don't exist. They were number one. Netflix pivoted from where they were with renting hard DVDs to streaming. Look where they are. Motorola, they clung to their old key button phones. Apple, 20 years ago, almost to the day, they came out with the iPhone. It changed the world. The final takeaway, startups don't die because they run out of money. They die because they run out of work.
Yeah.
So with that, we'll turn over to our star for the day, Anthony George. It's your story.
I've run out of money before. I'm still here, so he's right. Sure. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you guys for having me. Privilege and an honor to be here. Ashok has asked me to take 35 years and condense it to 45 minutes, so I'm really late. About 45 minutes, Ashok, or less?
Yeah. Exactly 45.
Exactly. Okay. So what we're gonna do is we'll do a one-page logo bio, so I can introduce myself, you can know where I came from. And then I'm gonna walk you through the 4 different companies very quickly that I have had or have now. And along the way, we're going to pick up some entrepreneurial principles, I call them. And then we're going to pivot and talk specifically about entrepreneurship for about 10 or 15 minutes.
On the table on the bottom.
Top one. Okay, awesome. I was born in Canada, have a green card. Just applied for my American citizenship and was approved, so now I'm officially American and a Canadian. It's a pleasure to be here. I grew up in Beaumont, Texas, went to Lamar University, graduated in 1988 with a physics degree, electrical engineering concentration, computer science minor, 168 hours, and I'll explain why that is. I've had one real job when I got out of school, went to work at a paper mill in Temple Inland for about 3.5 years as a control systems engineer. I've had 4 companies. I'm what's called a from scratch entrepreneur. So all 4 of those companies were started from simply and raised most of the capital myself, or it was my own money to get through those. We'll walk through those briefly. I got my Distinguished Alumni Award from Lamar 2018. I'm on 4 boards, Goose Capital. Have the privilege of serving on the board with Ashok. Woodlands Christian Academy, I've been the board chairman there for 13 years. Lamar University, CC Board of Directors, that's an entrepreneurial board. And Atmosphere is a startup that I'm supporting. Wife and I have a foundation called the AMG Charitable Foundation. Once you get there, I think it's important to give back. So we're all about children, either their education or their health. So we support cancer institutes. We're the largest supporter in Houston for St. Jude's, Sky High for St. Jude's subsidiary. So we support and, we've scholarship a lot of kids. That's the family about a year ago or so. On the left is my son Grant, he graduated Baylor in 23. On the left is my son Blake, who graduated UT in 2020. On the right is Grant in 2023, and my beautiful wife. This is what physics looked like in Halloween of 1987. Can you see me back there? I'm the devil for whatever reason. And, not the devil anymore, but I was. That is Mrs. Doubtfire. That is my physics professor, Dr. Pizzo. It will be important to know who he is later on. You'll see him come back again. So I did graduate. But I didn't start where I ended up. I started dual degree, computer science, and electrical engineering. Computer science was new. I was on a Honeywell mainframe computer with card decks and a DEC mini computer where you could outrun the keyboard, outrun the cursor. And I was doing well, 21-hour semesters, getting through all of summer. And I got to a junior level engineering course called Circuits 2, Dr. Carlin. And I was struggling in this class. It just, for whatever reason, I couldn't understand some of the things he was teaching me. So I went to his classroom one day and I said, Mr. Carlin, I need some help specifically with this. And he was rummaging around his office, not paying attention to me. And he said, Mr. George, what do you do in your spare time? And I said, good news. I work 30 hours a week at an engineering company. I'm getting great experience programming distributed control systems and PLCs, which is an up and coming technology for plants. I think it's great experience. And he said, well, that's your problem right there. I said, what do you mean? And he said, you're spending too much time at your job, not enough time in my class. So here's my advice. Quit your job at the engineering company, go sack groceries on the weekend, because if you do not pass my class, you'll never be an engineer and you'll never get out of it. What did I do?
Quit.
You did, Lamar?
I didn't. No, you didn't. I didn't quit.
No,
I did not quit.
I know you.
So I immediately marched over to the physics department, Dr. Pizzo. And I said, Dr. Pizzo, story. And he goes, hi, Mr. Carlin again. And I said, look, I need to graduate in 2 years. I want a physics degree with a double E concentration and a CS minor. And he wrote a custom curriculum for me, and in 2 years, I graduated. So the obvious principle there is, this is obvious. Never ever let anybody get in the way of your dreams. Go above them, behind them, around them, whatever you've got to do to be successful. But make sure you keep going. You'll see later in the fourth company called Field Tracks how fortuitous that pivot was. Had I not pivoted to the physics class, I wouldn't have had the knowledge to invent Field Tracks, which is the #1 thought pivot. So don't be discouraged if you look like you're off track. Sometimes these things work out to the positive. Serial entrepreneur. These are the 4 companies I've had. Enterprise was a hobby while I was in college. Control Dynamics was an engineering company that was a good working company, made a good living. Optibello was an abject failure, complete disaster, and bankruptcy, costing heart surgery. And Nautical Control Solutions is the company I have today, which is a flawless success. So we'll look at each one of those real quick. I had one product called ski bums, and they're cute little bums that my aunt made. You wear them on your lapel. And the guy in the top right, that's my roommate, his girlfriend, because I couldn't afford real models. But I went out and I solicited, found a distributor, got ski bums in all kinds of different ski stores. That was my first order for $1,500. Note the date on the entrepreneurial magazine. So I learned a lot about business. Probably did total gross sales less than $5,000 over 3 years. But ultimately I quit this because I got a real job at the paper mill. Quick asterisk on that, I was skiing in Telluride last year and I had a bum on my lapel I forgot to bring in this morning. And I skied up next to this lady at the lift and she goes, "Oh my gosh, that's the cutest little thing in the world. Where do you buy those?" I should have said, just a fraction. Thought about it. So I landed a job at the paper mill in 1988, and I'm a control systems engineer. And we had an IBM 1800 and it ran the entire plant. I'm sorry, it ran half the plant, ran the digesters and the bleaching area. We had an $8 million project to replace that with distributed control systems, which is why I was there. Project got canceled because the plant was only going to run that area for another 5 years. So I went to my boss and I said, "Boss, I've got an idea. I think I can replace that IBM 1800 with 4 compact 386 33 megahertz PCs with 4 megabytes of RAM." And my boss said, "You're crazy, nobody will." And I said, "Can I go around you and present it to the chief engineer? Will you support me?" And he said, he called me Anton. He said, "Anton, if you're that crazy, try it." So this had never been done before. So I went and presented to the chief engineer and I said, "I think I can do this for $100,000. And he calls the plant manager. The plant manager walks down and says, "Old country boy, W.C. Cole." He said, "Anthony, can you get that done by Christmas?" It was March. I said, "Absolutely. We can get this done." So I'm young and don't know I can't, right? He leaves. He said, "You got your $100,000. He leaves. I go home that day and throw up because I realized I've just completely burned my career. Remember, this had never been done before. Remember that phrase. So we went at it and put it all together. In December, we threw the switch on the IBM 1800. You see the PCs in the front. I'm the guy in the back with a blue and silver striped shirt with a black jeans. And it was a roaring success. It was a massive effort. I worked 80 hours a week. Management caught me in there on the weekends and they made me go home. So I snuck in through the big yard. I kept working. And we threw that switch. This happened. So what did I get for all that effort? I got a $3,000 raise to $36,000. Top dollar in 1980. I got a letter in my file and a company jacket. And it impressed the management team so much, they said, "We're gonna make you a paper guy." And I immediately knew I was gonna leave. But what did I get out of that besides, $3,000? I got an idea for a new company. Real quickly, back in the day, you bought hardware, software, and people from IBM or Honeywell or somebody. It was a single vendor, single source solution. What I saw coming in the market was a multi-vendor single source solution where you could buy somebody's hardware, somebody else's software. This is obvious today, but in the day this was. So I built a company called Control Dynamics International. That was our logo. And we were supplied the people to buy the hardware and software. With that idea, I realized I needed to save money. So I moved home with my mom. I'm single. I paid off all my debt. I saved $25,000. Big money back then. I took $50 out of every paycheck, put it in my pocket, and sold all my cars, my toys, bought a car for $1, went to the next store and learned everything I could about the business. I wish you'd have been around 30 years ago. A class like this would have, trust me, I would have gotten there a lot faster. So that was my beautiful car I sold. That was my motorcycle I sold. And that was the car I bought for $1. Mazda GLC. My friends called it the peanut. Now remember, I'm still single. So not only did the girl have to be somewhat attractive and smart, she had to have a nice car. Because I did. So with this car, I put my suit on and I drove back and forth to Exxon and drove to Chevron and I built a business in that little car. And I closed my eyes and envisioned it was a Porsche or maybe it was a Ferrari. But there was a dilemma. I left the paper mill in 1991 March. In February, found this car. Still a beautiful car. Porsche 928, single. But it was a beautiful car, the dream car I've always wanted. So I had a dilemma. I had $25,000 in the bank. I still had my job. Living at home with my mom. I was debt free. That car was for sale in Houston for $23,500. The CEO of U-Haul had owned it. It was a custom car. It was beautiful. I went and drove the car, fell in love with the car. Drove back home and I had a decision to make. Do I buy the Porsche or do I keep the Mazda and go with the business? What do I do?
Sell it,
Sell it?
business.
Well, I didn't buy the Porsche.
Yet.
There's a principle here. This is entrepreneurial principle number 2. It's called delayed gratification. Sacrifice early to live well later. And trust me, later comes sooner than you think. 30 years goes by like a blip. But there was a study done in England in the 40s or the 50s, kids and cookies. Does anybody remember that study? So what they did is they had scores of kids in a room and they were baking fresh cookies and they put one cookie in front of the child. And they told all the kids in the room, they said, you may eat that cookie right now, but if you will wait 2 hours, you may have a second. And so they stepped back and they watched. The preponderance of the kids ate the cookie, but some of the kids waited for the second cookie. They followed these kids all the way through their careers. Guess what? Kids that waited on the second cookie, the doctors and lawyers and entrepreneurs, the preponderance. The kids that ate the first cookie, they went off and had other jobs and were nowhere near as successful financially or otherwise. So delayed gratification matters. It's very important. Here's the good news. In 2005, I bought a Porsche and I 28 better than that. That's my real tall son now, Grant. Later on, when I could buy the Porsche, pay cash for it, and didn't bother me at all. And now, even later in life, I bought a one-off Ferrari Roma, which is tailor-made, has $250,000 in options. It's a one-of-one. It's already worth more than what I bought it. Fantastic. But I drove the Mazda GLC 3 years first. With my $25,000, I started Control Dynamics. We were a control systems engineering company. We built all kinds of great things. Pipeline SCADA systems. These are projects we had. Offshore drill stack control systems. A lot of upstream work on drill rigs. Part of our business was UMCS, which was a Universal Master Control Station, which controlled the subsea production of oil. We jointly developed that with ExxonMobil, multiple patents, and brought a lot of value to that company. I sold that company. We publicly traded. Along the way, in 2000, I formed a company called Optivello. Note that Optivello starts with an O and ends with an O, not just because I'm a dad, but because I thought it was cool. It stood for Optimum Velocity Digital Solutions Industry. Starts with an O and ends with an O. Real quickly, repeat after me. O. No. O. That's it real fast. I had to see you coming. God's got a sense of humor. It was an unfunded merger and the market collapsed, the dot-com bust. Ashok saw that happen with Enron Broadband. In fact, we were chasing Enron Broadband around trying to get business with you guys.
Enron Broadband occurred long after I left.
Well,
I started Enron Communication
Oh,
and Enron Broadband, it morphed into Enron Broadband in '99. I'm long gone.
so Ashok was gone. Anyway, we started this business and the market collapsed around me. The engineering company had been really good. We went from SIP to 100 employees in 9 years. Optivello was a holding company, and brought in an industrial networking company, an ERP company, and we were going to take data from the control room. It was the vision that companies were doing now, but we were ahead of our time and our timing was wrong. So the company collapsed. I laid off all but 18 employees, which was tough. I went to 3 bankruptcy lawyers and all 3 of them told me, you're done. Just bought a house, had 2 young kids. It took many years to dig $1.6 million. I went home to my wife and I told her, I said, hey, baby, I'm gonna fly out to LAX because there's a group of people that are gonna buy. I said, they're gonna save us. And she said, okay. I said, I'll be back in the day. Well, in the morning, there was a group of people that were scooping up all the leftover companies. So the deal was pretty simple. They were gonna hire me and pay me $200,000 a year plus give me health insurance, which is support I had kids. They were gonna do the same for my partner. They were gonna have equity in their deal. They were gonna fund my best employees, transfer the contracts to them, but we were gonna have to file chapter 7 on the debt. We had 26 vendors, most of my friends, and they were gonna let us keep the receivables, pay off the banks. So I thought, well, this is fantastic. I've been saved. So I go home and I call a pastor friend of mine, Hales, who actually married Michelle. And I said, Hales, good news. I said, we've got a rescue plan. And I said, the good Lord's looking out for us. He's going to take care of us. And he said, tell me about the plan. So I explained the plan to him. And he said, what about the $1.6 million and the 26 vendors? And I said, well, that's how business works. We're going to just write that off. And he said, well, that couldn't be from the Lord. He said, I said, why not? He said, because the Lord wouldn't have you in a situation where you were going to steal. The 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal. And I said, Hales, if I don't take this deal, I'm going to fail. He said, you will fail doing the right thing. So I went home to my wife and cold winter day, February in Houston. And I said, baby, it's over. I said, I don't know how we're gonna dig out of this. I just bought you a nice brick house. I said, we're done. And she said, just get home. So I get home and I walk in and she makes my favorite dinner, which is a big old pot roast, Jada's pot roast, mashed potatoes and everything. And I walk in and I see my 2 little boys, 3.5 years old, 6 months old. And the 6-month-old's looking at me, Daddy, Daddy's all excited. And I walk up and say, you understand, I have smoked your mom. And so, and it smelled so good. I said, my God, this reminds me of the Last Supper. And I can't even afford this. And so I sat down and I just completely broken down. I said, I have ruined our lives. And my wife sits on my lap, opens up a $4 bottle of wine, flips it over in my mouth. It's running down my face. She just says, keep drinking. So I got through 2 bottles of wine, and you know what she said to me? I'll start with what she didn't say. She didn't say, I've got 2 beautiful children. Go out and get a real job. You're a failure. You need to feed these kids. You need to take care of me. You know what she did say? She said, baby, I will live with you. I don't need this brick house. I don't need the new car. I will live with you in a motor home, but it has to be a double wide. She got fine, probably another bottle of wine. I woke up the next morning, 2-fisting coffee, and she ran me out the door. She said, so on my way down I-45, it's a car dealership there now, but they used to sell trailers. And right in the corner, right in the front, as I'm driving by, it said, gently used double wide, $19.99. So that's. So I went down, I hustled for business, built the company back up. I went to my partner, I fired him. We didn't take the deal. Called all 26 vendors, put them on a payment plan, paid them interest, paid every vendor off, paid the banks off. And the banker was so excited, he said, oh my God, everybody just sort of run out of us. He said, you paid us off. Here's a new line of credit for $1 million. I said, take your line of credit. I never borrowed $1 million. So everything I've done heretofore has been on my own money. Support a spouse. This is so critical. And you know this with Sheila. It's so important. If you're going to be in entrepreneurship, you're going to struggle. Despite how good you are, you're going to struggle. Be cautious of who you choose for a life partner, because it really, really, really makes a difference. Fuel Tracks is the company I have today. We monitor fuel consumption on upstream vessels, tankers, cruise ships, and we prevent fuel theft. We're number one in the world. Talked about this earlier. Got a dozen people in Nigeria, got a dozen people in Malaysia, got 8 people in Mexico, got an office in Saudi. So UAE. Oh, Brazil. We're opening an office in Brazil. Number one in the world, built from scratch. Just a quick overview of how that happened. So here we are. In 2003, I rebuilt my engineering company, got rid of everything else, and was building it back and paying off debt. And I had a friend come to me and say, "Hey, Kirby Inland Marine's trying to measure fuel consumption on the tugboat, and they can't link the technology." So I'm standing on the tugboat and looking at a rim, and I said, "Well, I've got hydrocarbon pipe." So I took a SCADA system, downsized it, put it on the boat, and it worked. It measured fuel consumed, it measured fuel onboarded, and it measured fuel inventory. 20 systems later, Kirby tells me, "We're not going to buy any more of these because we need something that will save money." And I said, "Well, how do I make it save money?" He said, "Well, there's throttle positions that you can set to reduce consumption, but nobody can do that." And I said, "Nobody can do that?" He said, "No, it's been tried several times. Remember that nobody can do that."
Yeah.
So never been done before, too many forces. So this is a technical, right? Very, very technical. Okay, so just a little bit of technical stuff. You got a boat, you got a barge, you've got multiple forces acting against that hull moving forward, right? The largest one is frictional forces, drag, but you've got current, you've got load, you've got wind, you've got all kind of things acting on that boat. And the problem set was, we have to measure wind, load. It's hard to measure frictional forces with the bubblers on the side of the hull. None of that will really work. So I realized that because I studied physics, I knew those forces were planar, right? They're in the same plane, they'll sum algebra. So that was me. I actually rode tugboats. Kirby said, "You can ride all tugboats you want." I rode them up and down the ship channel, 2 o'clock in the morning, up and down the Mississippi River, having a computer there. And I worked with throttles, and we created some algorithms to make the boats more efficient. So how does that work? So it's sort of like the dog question. F sub R is the resultant force, right? That pushes on that boat. So the forces come together and they're the resultant force. At what point in that equation does the working force pushing forward, when is it equivalent to the resultant force? When are they equal? Right? So if I push on this wall, if I push it 10 pounds on the wall, how hard is it pushing back? 10. If it's 5, I'm going that way. If it's 15, the wall's coming this way, right? So I remembered in physics where I couldn't delineate the individual forces, I could find the resultant force. If I could find the resultant force, what would I do with that? So it looks like the dog question, and y'all technically you'll get this question pretty quick. So you got a dog named Fido, P-H-Y-D-E-A-U-X, Fido. And Fido's sitting next to you. You've got a 8-ounce ball. You throw the ball, a trajectory at 30 degrees up, and the ball is flying through the air. You wait 1.77 seconds and you say fetch. Fido takes off and catches the ball. What's Fido's breed? It's okay. It's unknown. That was what this problem set looked like. Engineers from all over the world had studied this problem forever, and they couldn't figure it out. So what did we do? What am I already measuring with fuel tracks? Fuel consumption and GPS, miles per hour. If I do quick math, I can solve for what? Gallons per minute. F sub R equals F sub B at what point? When they're equal. And so I'm looking at that and I'm like, wait a minute. What begins to happen when the vessel moves forward? So all these forces pushing on me and I'm pushing back, and we're at steady state, and then the vessel moves. What happens when the vessel, we apply a force through a distance? That's called work. What's the equation for work? Which cost distance. Force, I'm measuring fuel consumption, which is a derivative of torque. More fuel, more torque. Once the motor warms up, it's close. And my DSPT is comes from the GPS, so I can actually calculate work. I can know how hard the vessel's working. So I say Fuel Tracks is lazy, it wants to do the least amount of work to get safely from point A to point B. So we developed these equations that look like this, an acceleration curve for a boat, any kind of boat, any ship. The curve changes depending on the forces acting on the hull. We discovered two equations, best speed and best economy. Best speed is taking the slip out of the wheel, making it efficient, go as fast as you can. Best economy is when the 45-degree tangential where the trade-off between fuel and speed is one. It's just that simple. And it's agnostic. Vessel agnostic. It works on speedboats, tugboats, ships, everything else. And absolutely. So best speed and best economy are patented. Quick story, I'm on the ExxonMobil campus. That's me on the right, that's my customer too. And I had just spent 3 hours with Tim and 3 other Exxon engineers. And these are ship designers, engineers, trying to explain to them that I didn't have to measure it. I didn't have to measure drag. I didn't have to measure all these things. And I was losing. Nobody believed me. You can't do this, you can't do that. They were predisposed, right? So we're actually going to the cube up there to have lunch. And when we get up there, we're having lunch, and Tim, who's very smart, looks at me and he goes, he said, you know what, you're right. He said, I don't care if it's wind or if it's drag or if it's current. I want to get my oil tanker from point A to point B as safely, as efficiently as possible. And you can do that, right? Yes, sir. Just push the button on the computer on the ship, adjust the throttles, and it will place you there. And he said, my God, that's brilliant. And I said, thank you. And he said, where'd you go to college? And I said, Lamar University. Said, Lamar. And I said, where'd you go to college? He said, I got my undergrad at A&M. And I said, well, that's your problem right there. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, how many eggs does it take to drive a ship? Well, good night. That was a mistake. Because 2 of the 3 engineers were ags. And they just stopped. And I didn't realize that you can't tell Aggie jokes to Aggies, right? But what is it with that? And I thought, good God, it took me 3 years to get there. And trying to be funny, I completely lost the deal, right? So Tim made me sweat about 20 seconds. He reached over and tapped me on the shoulder and he goes, ha ha ha. And then his 2 little minions go, ha ha, and they followed. I said, got you. Anyway. That was, when was that? 7, 8 years ago, $50 million in sales. They will not charter a ship. We have saved them over $1 billion. But check out how that happened, right? So I'm a physics guy. I wasn't predisposed. I'm not a naval architect. So I approached the problem using the fundamentals of physics. I came at it like this instead of like this, which they have been doing for years. Anyway, you can go read the patents and read the stories about it. It's incredibly novel, and my competition can't figure out how to do that. And every time I explain it to somebody, they're going, is it that simple? Embarrassing. Yes. So we also do, Fuel Tracks also makes things called mobile measurement units that roll around on the dock. We'll go between the tanker and the vessel to measure fuel. Ashok said later, precipitate a crisis, and this is one of those. That's Mr. Lansby. He's Nigerian, one of the smartest men I've ever met. He came to me and said, I want you to do what you do on Fuel Tracks. I want you to do that on the dock. So we created, this is the early version of the mobile measurement units. They're all over Nigeria, they're in jungles. Everywhere they buy and sell fuel, we're the unit. And so when I went to my engineering manager, told him what we could do, he said, that's his quote, you screwed up and said you could do it. And I said, you got 6 months. And he did. This is an email I received from Lansby in 2017, which I'm very proud of. Trust me, you have made yourself the highest and best vendor with us. I will surely make some comments on the project. ExxonMobil still our largest customer by dollar volume, but every major oil company. We also we took that MMU and we condensed it into a smaller unit like this, and this is a unit for the military. That's my team in 2018 pitching to the DoD. We get our first military contract this October. The first military contract for that is $53 million. It's an amazing amount of business. We will measure fuel for the military all over the world, just like we do for the oil companies. But look what happened in the precipitated crisis, right? We made the MMU. We presented that big MMU size of a Volkswagen to the DoD, and they said, we like that, but we wanted a two-man carry, 70 pounds that would fit on the C-130. So we did all the R&D ourselves, and we built that unit. So that the MMU, which now moves us to the #1 supplier to the military for fuel. So precipitating crisis, good point. You always want to expand your business, right? We could have just stayed on ships. We got great business, but we took on the challenge from Mr. Lansby for mandates, which led to this, which led to other things, which is how you scale and grow your business. That's Dr. Pizzo. Remember Mr. Doubtfire in 1988? This was in a few years ago. He came to see me because he had heard about us and I'm on board with him. And he was fascinated. We were having a conversation and I kept calling him Dr. Pizzo and he said, are you ever going to call me Steve? And I said, Dr. Pizzo. The student was never above the professor. Yeah. So imagine one day that's you and that's a show. Trust me, the stuff he's giving you is gold and you probably end up using it. Let's pivot real quick to entrepreneurship. 35 minutes in, right? I still don't know how to spell it unless I'm looking at it. But there's one letter in there that's super critical, the most important letter in the word entrepreneurship. You see it?
You.
You said that. Yes, sir. You. Entrepreneurship in the beginning is all about you. It's your idea, it's your dream, it's your goal, and trust me, nobody else cares. So you have to be hyper-focused on yourself and on getting your idea started. But it's always and only about you. So let's talk about the 3 steps to entrepreneurial success. Good ideas, your idea. How important are ideas? Important? Sure they are. Are they key? They're not. Here's why. Smart as you guys are, and Joe tells me you're the creme de la creme here. You know, nice. Thinking about your idea, there are horns, there are bears. There are people all over the world thinking about your idea. So when your idea may be critical, ideas are abundant and other people are thinking about them. So what about execution? Execution is important. Sure, executing your idea is incredibly important, but is it enough? You got a great idea, you're executing well. What really matters? All about leadership. More leadership. And this is where it gets critical. This is where it gets important. Leadership is the difference. Think about it like this. Regarding you, people tell you it's important to know your strengths, right? It's more important to know your weaknesses. And what you're going to do with your weaknesses is you're going to hire to cover your weaknesses so that you can build a team to go forward and be successful. So if you're a real techie person and you build a company, you may choose to be the CTO because you need a CEO that can pitch and sell your ideas. You have to be able to sell your employees, banks, market, your vendors. It's all up to you to sell that idea. I see so many smart entrepreneurs who just can't sell. So where do you find good sales guys? If you're the CTO, where do you find good sales guys? I'll give you these. They're in the College of Business, they're BC students, they're in a fraternity or a sorority, they're at the bar, they're drinking. They're the guys or girls that take their friends home late at night, but they can stand in front of somebody. So if you're not real comfortable getting in front of a room and pitching your idea, team up with somebody from the business school. I know it's PhDs, it's beneath you. At the end of the day, you can that type of teamwork.
Well, they've had a great example of that when you met the CEO of Lighter Tech. The three genius engineers went out and recruited him to be CEO.
Yes.
So they spent 45 minutes grilling him.
Ashok was critical of making that happen because he recognized that, right? Great engineers, great ideas, can't sell it. For principle number 4, be a leader. Bluntly, ideas are a dime a dozen. Lots of people can execute, few people can. You're gonna be fine. You'll see, you're seeing, you hire somebody else to do it. I've heard enough. 3 Ps, real quickly. Now, Ashok's already taught you all 3 Ps, right? This is standard, basic business 101. Ashok?
Yeah.
3 Ps, okay. What are they? People, process, and infrastructure, the 3 Ps. Maybe I'll talk about it.
Yeah, we talked about lots of things, but you're in your own inimitable way is also very interesting. The Anthony way.
Anything wrong with that slide?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody?
The third meeting.
Not P, is it? People, process, and infrastructure are the key building blocks for a business, but you know what really matters? The real 3 Ps, the first one's easy. You guess what the second one might be?
Profit?
People.
More people?
The third one?
Need more people.
Sure. Giving away the punch.
They did it in lecture 1, they forgot.
It's all about, I mean, what I used to think when we ran an engineering company is I had to be the person that developed the processes and developed the infrastructure and hired people into that. When I started Field Tracks, I was smarter and wiser. I hired people to cover my weaknesses, which were many, and they built. So how do you transition to success? Because remember, you start and it's just you, right? It's just you. You have to transition from you to team. This is where a lot of entrepreneurs fail. They're the smartest person in the room. They haven't hired to cover their weaknesses. And so here they are trying to make all the decisions. If you're that person, your company will never grow beyond. So how do you do that? How do you build a team? For me, I've got 5 VPs, a CFO, and country managers all around the world. I don't work any business at all anymore. I just, in fact, I haven't seen a customer. I heard Ashok talk about this. It's all about trust. You have to build trust between you and your team. As the CEO or the CTO, it's so critical that you build trust. These people are looking to you for leadership. They're counting on you. It takes a long, long time to build trust. You can smoke it in one upset argument, in one situation, you can tear it apart. So on versus in, my VPs, I require them to work 50% of the time in the business, 50% of the time on the business, strategizing, thinking about where we're going here. For me, I'm on the business 100%. Principle number 5, build trust. It's required. High performance teams. Just a couple more slides. The final P, the most important P. Without this P, I can promise you, I guarantee you, you will fail. You won't live with us.
Profit?
What's important?
Relationship.
Operations important.
People that we are.
People's important, but
Consistent.
For the zipper.
boom. You are the next successful entrepreneur. It trumps everything. I've run out of money before. It trumps cash. It trumps brains. It trumps luck. It trumps bad luck, good luck, any kind of luck. Persistence is everything. Never, ever, under any circumstance. If you could look me in the eye today, you could promise me, guarantee me that when you start, you will never finish. I can guarantee you right now, right here, success. If you can know for sure you'll never quit, I'll write you a $500,000 check. That's how much of it. Why is that important? Because you're not sure. When you get to that situation, you're married and you've got 2 young boys, and the world's come to an end and you're facing bankruptcy, how are you going to respond? Are you going to get up the next morning and grab some coffee, go down the road, hustle business, or are you going to file Chapter 7? The challenge there is you actually don't know. But if you look back over your life and look at some of the life events you've had, if you persevere through those, you can get through. But I would pay you if you knew for sure that you would never, ever, under any circumstance, ever quit. So I'll review these real quick, then we'll go around. Delayed gratification, don't eat the cookie. Put it on the side of the cookie. Ride the Mazda GLC. Don't try to look like you're a successful businessman until long past being a successful businessman. And you can buy a Ferrari. You need to support a spouse. Leadership is the key. Trust is required. Perseverance is secret sauce. Speaking of perseverance, and not to scare you, when
That's
I
what he
was,
looks underneath that shirt.
when I was 25 years old, I was working out at Jay's gym in Silsbee, Texas, working at the paper mill. Jay had won Mr. USA back in the early 80s, and he told me, he said, "Anton, come here." He said, "You ever think about bodybuilding professionally?" I said, "Who doesn't want to look like horses?" And he said, "You've got genetic potential." He said, "Give me 18 months and a lot of time and dedication." He said, I can get you on stage. So I'm 25 years old. I go home. I said, "Give me 2 weeks. I'm thinking about wanting to look like Arnold." And I've got a business plan. Which did I do? I took the business route and stayed skinny. Stayed in the gym, but I stayed skinny. And when I turned 60 years old 2 years ago, I told my wife, I said, "I remember what that man told me 35 years ago. I don't work in the business anymore. I can afford to hire trainers." So my wife is next to me, and then flanking those are my 4 trainers. I'm spending $8,000 a month because I could afford. And those 4 trainers got me on stage at Texas State. From there, now qualified for national training. Super. I'll stop there.
Great. Inspirational, indeed. Right, we need me back. Or we left off. You can see what he told you in 45 minutes is not very different from what I've told you over 7 lectures. But his version may be better. Okay. All right, so now we get to the point, and you and Anthony referred to it, and I've said this to you so many times. You gotta be able to tell your story. Good story, maybe. There's only one caveat I'd add to Anthony's never quit. You may need to pivot, which he has done so successfully 4 times. Don't beat your head against the wall when you know you're gonna fail. That's what. All right, so we'll talk about some assignments. We talked about just scaling, metrics, and pivoting. So, small assignment, who's going to volunteer to present it next week? 1 or 2 pivot options for your idea. Who wants to take that? The old military way. Everyone step back. There's only one left. Left standing. Any volunteers? All right. You're going to talk about what, because I think you have the potential to pivot with what the technology you're developing.
I guess so. Let's
Yeah.
see next week.
and share it with Dagesh and come up with something.
Sure.
And 1 or 2 page plan, what are your top 3 metrics? What does success look like post MVP, and when would you consider a pivot? Okay, these are all, they have access to the deck, right? At all times.
Yes.
So download the whole thing, because go back, some of the detail on scaling and metrics to sort of absorb it. When you get it all thrown at you like you're drinking out of the end of a fire hose, it's almost too much. So thoughtfully look through all of there's plenty of information there, plenty of data there, turn it into information. But now we get to the far more soft skills part. There's still data here, but we're slightly morphing into the soft skills portion of this lecture series. Our last lecture will be all about soft skills. We're gonna have a celebrity guest speaker, just like Anthony come in. He's the Vice Chancellor of the University of California, Santa Cruz. And he'll come in and talk to us about all of the soft skills, including personal, with spouse, with customers, with investors, with classrooms. And this is so important because data convinces, but stories convert. Doesn't matter if I convince you that I've got a great idea. I haven't converted you to my religion, which is you're gonna help invest in my company or you're gonna help advise me. So it is the soul of all startups, all, irrespective of how technical, how crazy your idea is that it's, nobody else can do it. You still need to tell the story, and you need to tell it in a compelling way. And there are 3 kinds of stories that you could tell. Your origin, the 3 essential components. Why this idea? Why now? And why you? Why not someone else? So that's number 1, the origin. Whose pain point are you solving? What pain point are you solving? And how are you solving it? That's the customer story. Your story, customer story, and the vision. What's the future you're creating? Those are the 3 key elements, any good storytelling. So the anatomy of a pitch has 9 components. Remember this, when you present on the 15th of November, you don't have those 9 components clearly delineated, you're not going to score very well. You're not going to convince people. You're not going to convert people. Now, how you tell the story comes next, but this is what you need to be able to tell a story. The 9 components, which is what's the problem? What's the solution? What's the market the solution's intended for? Who's competing? In the case of the window washing robot, it's human beings hanging from ropes with buckets and squeegees on their hip. What's your long-term competitive advantage? Your IP, your trade secrets, your processes, your proprietary processes. So what is it that you can build a moat around your technology and your idea and your company so that somebody just doesn't come in and take it all away from you? Now, not all of you have to have such defensible IP. You may have other things, but you have to address that. How are you going to get this sold? What's your business model? We did that last week, the financial modeling, your team, and the ask. How much do you need at this stage of fundraising to get to the next stage? And why is it as much as you need it, and how are you going to use it? So the uses, the sources and uses of funds is part of the ask. Everybody clear about the 9 components? Anybody think there's one too many or one too few?
No.
Because if you don't provide all of this information, you're going to get asked that by a potential investor, like an Anthony, for instance.
Many times people say you should talk about risks.
Yes,
Where would that fit?
backup plan, backup slots. I always have risks in the backup. And then I have nice little charts that have sort of a clock that shows execution risk, technology risk, market risk, financial risk, all of the risks that you can identify. And we can talk about that. We're going to talk about that when we get to the soft skills part. And this is what investors look for. Clear solution to a problem. Have you validated your business model? Do you have traction in the market? Depending on the stage you're in. Or are you very early stage? Are you prototype? Are you pilot? And how credible is your story? Yeah, DJ.
What is meant by sales strategy?
How are you gonna get the product out to market? Gonna use, what's your pricing model? What's your sales? You're gonna use direct sales, distributors, internet, digital. You've got 12 customers and you can easily identify those 12. So that's how you're gonna get the product that you have developed with all of that IP that you have created to market. And how much you're gonna sell it for, that's in the business model. Sales and marketing strategy, if you want to call it, but you know, everything starts with sales. Sales is what we talked about. You need somebody to sell your idea, but you also need somebody to sell your product. How are you gonna go about selling it? You're gonna call on these people yourself and knock on their door and sell them your generator? How are you gonna do it?
Most likely you have to reach out to the owners of the businesses and tell them.
See, so that, is it push? Is it pull? You advertise, do you find partners? That's sales strategy. I think that's the simplest part of all of those 9 components. So the whole idea of how do you make a great pitch is you go from the data that you have to some dramatic impact. And how do you create dramatic impact to make an investor say, man, I'd rather go, rather than buying Apple shares, I'm going to put my money into this. You got to have the data. You cannot have a story without the numbers. Has to have a numbers and has to have the 5 kilo, the problem. So you make people feel the pain. There's a pain point that needs to be solved. Your unique insight, your unique solution. Why are you better than the competition? Are you big enough to matter? If you're a tiny little pimple in the dimple of the butt of an ant in terms of market, why should he write you a $500,000 check? And finally, why will you beat the competition? Why are you going to? So this is all got to be embedded in those 9 components that we talked about that are part of your storytelling. Even you who've got such a captive market, you tend to go out and raise money, but you've already raised 8 million from the government, so maybe you don't need any.
Oh, we do. Never enough.
Agreed. So this is what investors fund. They fund clarity of vision with a solution that solves a pain point. That's all embedded in clarity. Conviction, that's the team, the ability to beat the competition, and the chemistry. Investor mindset, they hear hundreds of pitches, particularly venture capital. Even us at Goose, we hear a dozen pitches a month, maybe more. So what they want to see is, is it a real problem? Are you competitive? Do you have good IP? Do you have evidence of traction? Clear path to profitability? And is it a great team? Yeah. Making sense to all of you? Life storytelling matters. Human beings, this is a scientific fact, remember stories 22 times better than they remember facts. This is medical research has proven this. So if you tell somebody a story, do you all remember my joke from the first session? With a Texas cattleman who goes to Spain? I guess you don't.
Sometimes the bull loses.
Bull wins.
The wins, and sometimes the bull wins.
Yes. So stories, people remember. Data and facts, they forget right away. And they create some trust and they create emotional resonance. If you're able to identify what pain point you're solving. And you make the customer the hero of your story. That's the whole idea. The customer, your customer is the hero of the story. And you, the startup, are the one that is the tour guide. Just as a visual. So let's take an example. Tesla became successful because they were selling a future for the automotive industry without fossil fuels, without pollution. Airbnb says you can stay anywhere. Airbnb is one of my favorite examples. You've heard me use it in several of my lectures. Netflix, same thing. Changed the whole paradigm of how you can watch movies. Yeah, Kumi, you have a question?
Yeah, what would that look like? What would the hero's journey look like for a B2B instead of B2C?
Depends on each one's case is different, Your customer, who's one of these 12 companies, you gotta make them the hero in terms of that they've made the right choice, they're gonna save all this money. It's 20,000 kilometers of tape that they're wrapping, nobody else is doing this. I gotta know your product better to be able to, but it's not that hard to construct.
Sure.
This is probably one of the most important slides I've seen here today, is being able to tell that story. You want to elicit somewhat of an emotional response.
Yeah.
Like a crescendo, Ashok said at the end, and they write a check or they buy your product.
Okay, so here we talk about, this is one of the great stories. Some product that has truly, truly changed the world. I mean, as important as Henry Ford's motor car or Alexander Fleming's discovery of penicillin. He took three separate pieces. An iPod, which he had developed because of Napster for music, a phone, and internet communication that were happening on laptops. And the conflict was, this is too fragmented. Nobody had really thought of putting it all in one device. And he did it. 20 years ago, started the smartphone era. And life is unthinkable without it today. We turn on our air conditioning at home from here when we're getting ready to go back because we have a smartphone, for instance. Or, I can turn on the cooling in my car because I know it's too warm, Houston heat, and it'll be cool by the time I get there. All these sorts of things. And so the whole point of this is that you've got to be able to convince people with those emotional stories. Building the deck starts with what's the broad outline. If you're pitching to a VC, I'd keep it to 15 slides. Those 9 components still addressed. If it's angel investors or customers, I could go longer. It could even go longer than 25. And the design matters less than the clarity. You got to have a clear message. And each of those 9 components should answer an investor's hidden question, even if the investor doesn't know he has that question. You elicit the question and he said, that's the answer that I want. Then finally, after you've done all of that, you got to be able to deliver it. So you've built your 9 component deck. It's 25 slides. You've got all kinds of great information in it. Customer is the hero. Now, how are you going to deliver it? First of all, remember that you should always prepare. This is one of my favorites. If you fail to prepare, prepare to fail. So practice your pitch. Practice in front of family. Practice in front of the camera and watch yourself. Have you ever done that? When you're supposed to pitch an assignment in school or you've got to give a speech, have you ever taped yourself? Tapes. I'm dating myself. Have you ever filmed yourself
Yes.
and watched it and gone, oh, right?
All the time.
Because that's the way to improve.
Once get traumatized. Still watching.
So, and you need to do that several times, particularly for November 15th. Everybody going to compete on November 15th?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Kumi?
Yes.
Okay. Make sure you, and we'll get to this. So it's the 3 Ps in a different way.
Of course it is.
Prepare, prepare, prepare. And the whole idea, I want to convey this in terms of the image you portray. If you're stiff, if you're nervous, if you do all, and we'll get to some of the other things you might do that you will come off less convincing. So the 2 words I like for you to remember is be languid. You know what the word languid, right? To me, the most perfect example of languid was an actor called Roger Moore. language. Everything was just smooth and relaxed. So be languid and relaxed when you deliver. And that's why practicing in front of a camera and watching yourself is so important. Eye contact. You notice I eye contact every one of you as often as I can. Don't look above people or look down on the ground. Make eye contact. And don't fall into the trap of making eye contact with the same friendly face all the time. And pace a little, walk about a little, not pacing like this, but walk a little, circulate a little. Except when you do a pitch competition, the two partners stand side by side, but even then you can walk up and down. Or eliminate verbal viruses. What's a verbal virus?
Fillers.
Another one, is very common. Like, no, those are the top three. And there are several more. Do not use them. It's the most aggravating thing, particularly if you're prepared. If you ever catch me saying other than when it's relevant, give me an F. Sometimes it's relevant, Tell a story. Don't read. Don't read off the slides or don't read off a script. You're actually in the storytelling mode. You're Hans Christian Andersen is who you are. Everybody know who Hans Christian Andersen is? Okay. This is a very young crowd. I know. Who should I use?
Ask them.
No, J.K. Rowling. Everybody knows J.K. Rowling, right? Be J.K. Rowling. Use pause for emphasis. Don't just keep rattling on. These are all just a way of telling stories. And a little humor always helps. A one-liner, like joking about you guys being too young to know who Hans Christian Andersen is. It's just a one-liner. It's just a little levity. Otherwise, it gets too serious. Humor helps. But don't be too witty, like he said with the Aggies. He was witty. Here's a little statement I like to use. Humor, pictures, wit, punctures. Wit hurts, punctures. Humor, pictures, paints a picture. So don't be witty, be humorous. Everybody getting this? Let's see. Oh, we better pick up the pace here. The picture, dream, and the vision, we already talked about that. That's why. A story builds belief, builds trust, builds the story versus facts. And how do you handle questions in a Q&A? Because after every pitch, you're going to have Q&A, including in the competition on the 15th, you're going to have a 5-minute Q&A. Do not start answering the question before the questioner has finished. Hear them out, even though sometimes people ask questions that become a speech. But be patient. Just listen, let them finish. And if you don't understand it, ask them to clarify. Or you give them a clarifying question. And if you don't know it, admit you don't know it. Say, I'm going to get back to you. But don't lie or don't invent an answer. So be composed. Don't be Mr. All Smart. Now, but be prepared. I always say build a backup deck of slides so that you have, when people ask you for risks, okay, let me get you the risk slide, out it comes, and it's self-explanatory. You've all watched the Lightrotech deck, right? Pitch, the 15-minute. You all have? Please. Have you gone back and watched it? Doesn't look like people have. Please do so. They knocked it out of the park, speaking their third language, not their mother tongue. I mean, that's an astonishing feat. Because they were prepared, they had sense of humor, they told a story, they made the customer the hero, all of the above. Let's talk about SpaceX, though I detest the man. He's a great storyteller. He didn't just pitch rockets when he started SpaceX and got billions of dollars of funding. He said he pitched the vision of human beings living on Mars, which is captivating for my grandchildren. And final takeaway, investors invest in stories. What's your story? Think about that. So thanks very much, guys. This is lecture number 7.
I wanted to mention you were showing Steve Jobs and the iPhone. For those younger people, go to Google and Google IBM, Apple, Macintosh, the 1984 commercial at the Super Bowl, and it shows a kind of IBM shareholders meeting, and this young woman comes running into the shareholders meeting and throws a mallet into the screen, and it's basically Apple upsetting the disrupting the market. And Macintosh was the small, PC that revolutionized was the advent of the laptop, basically.
Actually, it was Xerox that started the first great laptop, the desktop, and they didn't pivot. And they ran into the wall. They were the inventors of the first desktop, the Xerox Star. In fact, I was in San Diego at their tech center and tried the first time in the 70s. And that's going back to the earlier part of this lecture about pivoting is so important. Kodak got left behind. Motorola got left behind. BlackBerry got left behind. IBM got left behind. Xerox came. Because they didn't pivot. They didn't have their finger on the pulse of the market. And Apple did. More than once. More than once. Any questions? Any thoughts? Homework? Yes.
I have a question. Okay, so in my case,
I have a question for you. Get his phone number. Because he has 12 people in Nigeria. He can help. And he's a very helpful guy. Happy to. Yes.
I have more specific questions pertaining to the actual pitch. So is there a limit on how many slides we can have in our deck? Are you in favor of having like sort of like appendix in our slide deck? How long is it going to be? Just kind of detail.
It depends on the length of your allotted time. You have 10 minutes. So I think, and it also depends on how you present the slide. Do you remember the Lighter Tech opening 5 slides? They took 30 seconds. First slide. This is the Ford F-150, the greatest selling car in the last 50 years in the United States. This is 10,000 Ford F-150s parked at the Kentucky Speedway parking lot, unable to ship because they're missing one part, and then comes a potato chip. Chips. No, not that chip. The little humor we talked about, but microchips, and then you see a semiconductor wafer. Why is it not possible? And then they go into their story. So it depends on how you structure it. Even that can happen even in the middle of your pitch. So the number of slides is not important. It's a matter of the important part is communicating those 9 pieces and how you do it. But in those 5 slides that took 20 seconds or 30 seconds, Alex was able to communicate the problem. Showing the picture of 10,000 Ford F-150s parked, unable to ship because they were missing not potato chips, but semiconductor chips. Yes, have an backup slides. Don't have an appendix, but have backup slides that are not important to those 9 components, but might be important to an investor, like the risk slide. Have you thought about your risks? Where are your greatest risks? And you have a hyperlink, it's slide 47, up it comes, and you have all the risks clearly shown. And that's where practicing your pitch repeatedly will help you. You will eliminate those uncomfortable pauses when you're thinking about what to say next. Or repeating yourself when you sometimes can't think of what you have coming up. All of these things are what will just trip you up. And, once again, please go back and look at the lighter tech pitch. It was part of lecture 1. And see how flawlessly they pitched it. Well, it wasn't completely flawless, but it was pretty darn close. Don't forget, they were not pitching it in their mother tongue. Just as some of us are not. But that answer your question, or?
Yes, so it's not necessarily a specific rubric, it's just about meeting those 9 criterion.
And in the time allotted. If you get 15 minutes, you have more time, you can have more slides, or you can spend more time per slide. One of the things that I think is very important, and I've tried to do it here, except that I violate my own rule once in a while because it's what I present is a leave behind. It's to have the fewer the words on a slide, the better you are. So even in my busier slides, there are not as many words and the fonts are larger and easier for people to see. You don't want people just squinting at the screen and not listening to you. What you're saying is more important than what they're squinting at.